I called to order the meeting of the Bloomington School Board on August 19th. All members are present, and I want to welcome back Arlene Bush. It's good to see you again, Arlene. Glad you could be with us tonight. We begin our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, then we'll move on to the agenda. Would you please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We expanded our meeting agenda tonight over what it was originally scheduled to be because we are going to move straight into what was given as information reports. We're going to hear in a study session or workshop, and instead we're going to incorporate that and invite everybody here to remain if you'd like to in order to hear those reports. Of course, all of our meetings are open anyway, but we are not going to move into another session. We're going to continue on our meeting through Part B agenda. You have the availability of an agenda on the counter over there, and I will entertain a motion then from a board member for approval of the agenda tonight. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded for approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, changes? Yes, Director Hibbs.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask that Part A, Item 4, be moved to the Part B agenda.
Part A, Item 4 is titled Regulation for Information, Regulation 503.2 Student Assignments / Transfers. Is there any discussion? Wait a minute, we need a second in order to move that. So is there a second?
So moved.
Okay, moved, seconded. Right. Director Hibbs, would you like to explain why you'd like to move that?
I'd just like to have some discussion of that at the board table.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Then we will move that to the Part B agenda. I didn't ask what order that would be in. I guess I'm assuming it would follow in order, and then that would be the first item in the Part B agenda. Is that agreeable to everyone? Then let's move ahead in that way. Are there any other changes, any amendments proposed to this agenda now? Then all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, and it carries. Following the approval of the agenda, we usually are looking to recognize student, staff, and public. Sometimes we have particular recognitions of friends of the school district or acknowledgement of accomplishments of our students and staff. At this time, however, I understand that there are people who would like to address us on an item that's not on the formal agenda. So that's my next question is there someone who would like to address the school board on a matter not on our agenda tonight? And I understand there is. Would you please come forward, identify yourself, and speak to us?
My name is Dennis Kane, and with me is Jenny Bergstrom, and I'll explain, and thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Chairman Culver and Superintendent Fujitaki and all of the school board, thank you for inviting us to bring forth a message of how are we doing with our coordinating committee. This group is called the Citizens for Safer and Smarter Schools. And we have some individuals in the audience tonight that represent those who have been attending for about 3 weeks or so. Yes, good. We have about 60 people that are attending our meetings on a weekly basis. And they are busy with scheduling tasks and timelines and developing action plans and following strategies that we have shaped together. Before I get into much more, I would like to personally thank Chairman Culver for his leadership and the commitment of the entire school board to unanimously support a resolution seeking capital projects levy. I also wish to thank Chair Culver and Director Maureen Bartolotta for agreeing to co-chair the school board committee, which is a part of our coordinating committee. And thanks to you, working with us, you have been reaching out to the community and finding volunteers for our group, and also beginning to help us spread the word among the community about our referendum. Then on behalf of my other chairs, Dick Bergstrom and his wife, Jenny Bergstrom, who is with me this evening. I extend a special thank you to all of the parents and citizens and staff who are joining us in an effort to inform and educate and advocate for passage of our capital projects levy. It is a given that Bloomington teachers, support staff, and leaders are trusted to keep our children safe during the school day. It is also an expectation that we prepare our students for the future. And that future, we know, involves technology. And that's a much different world out there than what perhaps you or I had or experienced when we were going through school. Technology is rapidly unfolding. And I might say, personally, within the last 5 years since I've retired, I have witnessed that technology has been changing rapidly. Also, the 15 years prior to that, for the 15 years that I taught at Jefferson and Kennedy, I also witnessed within the classroom how much technology was evolving. As you know, Safe and Innovative Schools Referendum 2013 has two ways to express itself. One is educational technology, and the other is safe schools. It is well understood that a healthy public school system is desired by families who wish to live in Bloomington. And it also attracts people who like to work here. So I call upon the school board and parents and the community as a whole. Please continue to support our efforts to inform and educate those voters to help us continue the quality of Bloomington Public Schools. We are attempting to keep it at the top level of Minnesota schools, those schools, the top schools in the upper Midwest, and the top schools in the nation. I'd like to introduce Jenny.
I will be quick. I also wanted to thank the school board for your past and future support, our advisors, the committee chairs, all of the committee members. I want to thank the teachers and the support staff for their support in getting the referendum passed. And I want to encourage everybody to look at our Facebook page, Yes for BPS, or go to our website, www.yesforbps.com. There's lots of information there. If you have additional questions, you can contact us. There's a information page there. You can put your information, and somebody will get back to you with answers to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis and Jenny, thank you so much for being here and for the work you're doing to pass the referendum. And I would like to ask if there's anyone else in the audience now that would like to address the school board. Anyone else? Right then. Thank you. Then we'll move on with our organizational business, going on to Part A, agenda items. Is there a motion for approval of Part A?
Move approval. Second.
Okay, moved and seconded for Part A agenda approval. Is there any discussion? We'll move to a vote. All those say aye in favor.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Part A agenda is carried. We move to the Part B agenda then, beginning with the item regulation for information that was transferred from the Part A agenda. And our Assistant Superintendent, Chris Lennox, is here to speak to that, that motion.
Chairman Culver, Superintendent Fujitaki, members of the board, happy to answer any questions. In a nutshell, just some general overview I think that was in your packet. Specifically, we were looking to make a change at the regulation for transfers at the middle level, looking at an addition to overall difference, overall population or enrollment difference between each of the schools, but specifically at grade levels, and that really has to do with the number of sections and staffing they have at each grade level. One of the concerns, I think, that had come up this spring as we were doing staffing is that Olson Middle School's 8th grade was getting very large, and the number of students, overall population, if the 75 student difference ends up going to all one grade level, it can create some very inequitable class sizes from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade. So the principals had specifically asked, the 290 student number actually came from old regulation, and asked if we could forward that again. That was the previous, it was included in prior regulation in the past prior to the boundary work, as I understand. So with that, I'll open it to any other questions.
Thank you. Well, I believe Director Hibbs wanted to be sure we discuss this, so Mark, what do you have?
So, do you know where we stand currently?
I don't have the exact numbers. I could get you, Olson clearly, of the 3 middle schools, Olson's the largest, then Oak Grove, then Valley View. There is a 75 student differential at this point with all of the schools to Valley View. So really no more transfers out of Valley View. And I believe Oak Grove to Olson is also closed overall enrollment. This proposal is each grade level. At this point, I think Olson was really the only school that was looking at that significant of a differential between each of the grade levels. And it was 8th grade specifically.
And
You could bring that back.
that is being driven by transfers from Oak Grove or Valley View into Olson?
I think a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it's just the population. So a class can be different based on, just population of where they go. So students living in the attendance area. But what we didn't want to is compound that. So let's say, for example, the population living within the residence or enrollment area for Olson at 8th grade is larger than normal. And then if you add to that, because of the differential, up to 75 more students, that 8th grade class really becomes, the class sizes at 8th grade specifically start becoming much larger than they were ready or able to deal with. So we want to make sure that we could close a grade level to transfer. Obviously, anyone residing within an enrollment boundary would be exempt.
Does the, we've got a census or a survey. If you look at the numbers at the elementary level that fall within the different elementary schools and the boundaries,
Feeder school, yes.
would you anticipate that, going forward, that this condition will exist?
No, I don't think we will see it on a regular basis, any particular class. Every once in a while, there's a bubble that comes through at one of the grade levels at any of the schools, and that's why the principals asked. They may need to close a specific grade level, or at least have a conversation, so that all of the transfer that's allowed under the 75, we wouldn't want all of that coming in at one grade level. It's unlikely to happen, but if it did, they would want that grade level mark to be able to say, well, we're gonna close 8th grade. We can still accept 6th graders or 7th graders, but at 8th grade, we'd close that particular grade level.
So the resulting impact of this will be that Olson will be closed?
At
Transferred?
this point, it's pretty close. If it wouldn't be closed now, it's very tight at 8th grade for this upcoming school year, yes.
Okay.
And we've actually, because it's 75, the differential's already 75, we're already at that anyway for closing internal transfer.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Chris,
Victor Bergstrom?
just as long as I've got you here, you're talking about intra-district transfer, not
I
in
am.
open enrollment?
Not open enrollment. Open enrollment is a different policy.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Are there any further questions of the Assistant Superintendent? Is there any board discussion? And are you ready to move to a vote? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? And it carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate our having the ability then, Director Hibbs, to take a formal action, as it were, on that item. It was brought to us for information, and perhaps in the future I could have some clarification on that from the superintendent if there was a change in policy I'm sure that would come to us, maybe regulation, that's a little different situation. I would appreciate you bringing that to us, and for Director Hibbs for bringing it into a part of an agenda where we could have more questions and answers and find out the specifics about that situation. Continue with the Part B agenda. The item that's listed as number 1 currently, bid award supplemental student transportation. And our Executive Director of Finance, Rod Zivkovich, is present at the table. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Director Hibbs.
Resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271 approves the attached resolution authorizing the City of Bloomington and its Port Authority to extend the duration of the authority's tax increment financing number 1I Bloomington Central Station through December 31st, 2039.
Second.
Are we taking that out of order here?
Yeah.
Director Hibbs,
Looking
we
right-
should be
Did I get
working
that
with
wrong?
bid awards with student
Supplemental.
transportation.
Oh, sorry.
Although Rod is at the table for each, if we could have the indulgence of the school board, let's move ahead with that item since it's been moved. If I don't hear any contradiction to that, we can move ahead with that. Anyone object?
It's already read in.
All right, moved and seconded. Was there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. We will be discussing improving extension of tax increment financing then.
Chair Culver, Superintendent Fujitaki, board members.
Right.
I'm here tonight to present the increase in the TIF for the central station. I met with the city of Bloomington about a month ago. Part of the legislation in the last session with the state, they got approval to extend their, the TIF on that period from 2031 to 2009. Part of that was due to the economy, just as they started off the TIF before, kind of went downward turn. And what they're looking for is to extend the TIF so they're able to develop that area moving forward. Basically, what it just does is it gives them the whole 25 years to start from this point in time.
Are there questions, Mr. Zivkovich, Director Hibbs?
So could you explain to all of us why this is relevant to the school district and why the school district should support it?
I think it's, the relevance to the school district is, part of it is that the city needs to have their approval, both the school district and the county, to be able to pass, to be able to extend it. What this does is it says, instead of having the TIF run out or holding back some of the market value in 2031, it extends that to holding it back till 2039. How it benefits us is, based on the assumptions of the city, they would have a very hard time of developing that property in the period of time that we're looking right now to do through 2031. We would benefit by, as they develop that property, we would see on our referendum piece of our levy, we would see a benefit of from $1 of any improvements that are done in that area. Then we would see the other benefits once in 2039, once the overall comes off the books. So we'll see growth overall within the district and improvements within the city itself.
But assuming that's true, it's a delay of 8 years before we'll actually reap those benefits, is that right?
We will reap the benefits on our referendum from day one per dollar. So when they start developing property currently, let's say in 2015, we will see the benefit on our referendum. It'll spread it over that period of time. We will not see the benefit of the full amount on the rest of our levy, like our capital projects or those items, until
2039.
2039.
Thank you. Are there other questions of our expert at the table?
Rod, I understand that one of our former colleagues, Melissa Halverson-Wicklund, was a co-author on this bill?
That's correct.
All right, well, I know that we all trusted Melissa when she was here, so Can't see why this would be bad legislation.
Any further questions? Any board discussion then? For, against? Then we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of the resolution say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And it carries. Then we will move to number 1, bid award, supplemental student transportation. Would someone care to make that motion to get that before us now? Director Hibbs.
Mr. Chair, resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271, number 1, accept bids for the supplemental student transportation sources as follows. Special ed routes to Septran Incorporated, Bloomington, Minnesota, at $198.35 per route. Regular routes to Laser Transportation Incorporated, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, at $282 per route. Field trips and charters to Minneapolis and Suburban Bus Company Incorporated, Minneapolis, Minnesota, at $149.91 per trip. Short-term out-of-district routes to Twin City Transportation Incorporated, Mendota Heights, Minnesota, at $42.27 per trip. Early Reading First program to Septran Incorporated, Bloomington, Minnesota, at $29.75 per trip. And number 2, approve contracts with the above companies to provide these services.
Second.
We had a motion made and seconded. Executive Director Zivkovich.
These are brought to the board every year. They're additional service contracts with different transportation companies. It is to handle overflows within the district when we're not able to handle field trips or some of the other items ourselves.
And if I can ask, what is the basis for using these contractors at lowest rate or experience with them or both?
It's lowest rate.
Thank you for clarifying that. Any further questions? Any board discussion? We'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. And it carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda, I'm pleased to move to. It's always good to have Bill Morris back at the table and joining us, and he'll be joined then by Peter Leatherman, Rick Kaufman, and we're going to have a report on the results of our occasional community survey. This is the results for July 2013 in the field survey. So I'll turn the agenda over to you. An information item, there's no resolution required.
Chairman Culver, Superintendent Fujitaki, members of the board, members of the community, you have the starting offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings here for you. Want to take this brief opportunity to thank Bill Morris and Decision Resources. I continue to be amazed by the work they do and the love and focus they have on Bloomington Public Schools, a lot of school districts, but they really serve us well. Had an opportunity to work with Peter and Bill in the development of the community survey, as well as get the results and spend some time as they sort of analyze them for us and the presentation that they will provide for you tonight. So Bill and Peter will go through the presentation this evening, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. Bill.
Great, thanks, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk about this survey. In fact, it's one of the strongest surveys that we have currently across metropolitan area school districts. Things have changed. You're going to see some, I thought, stunning results in terms of voter predispositions and the way in which voters were reacting to certain statements, in particular messages about the referendum. But just to go over the basics of the survey with you, we spoke with 400 randomly selected households across the community. That included households that were purely cell phone households and also those households that were on landlines. The survey took place in July. The non-response rate was 3.5%. Keep in mind that the normal non-response rate in surveys across Minnesota is about 33. We've never had trouble really convincing people to take a survey here. It's been getting them at home that has been the major issue. The survey demographics did conform within plus or minus 5% with updated census statistics about the community. So we do feel we have a representative sample. And the average amount of time it took for a respondent to go through the survey was 21 minutes. Although we did have, again, 10% who spoke with us for more than an hour. That was their choice, that was not our choice. We do not try to abbreviate these discussions at all. Now, having said that, let's begin with a couple of open-ended questions. That is, we like to ask people what's at the top of their mind very early on in the survey. In that way, we're not pushing them into one path or another. So one of the questions that we used in this survey is, what do you like most about the Bloomington Public Schools? And as you can see from the chart, almost 60%, 58% talk about the quality of education here as either being excellent or good. In addition, 13% good teachers were also pointed to as kind of a third asset, certainly an asset of the district. And then finally, we can take a look and combine some things with respect to curriculum. 7% noted that they like the fact that the school district offers such a good broad curriculum for all students. Now, one thing that we very rarely end up with in our open-ended question, this usually comes up later, is that people also thought it was a very well-run district. So in looking at it, the key then, in terms of what people tend to focus on, and remember now, this is a subsample of the entire population. This is not just parents. Is first the educational quality, and second, the good teachers. As you can also see, people talked about good communications. I think that was Rick's household. Sports teams were mentioned. And we had 5% who said there was nothing they liked about the Bloomington Public Schools. Very, very small percentage, but they were fairly consistent. We call those core opponents in terms of the public schools. Now, having asked what do you like most, we should ask what's the most serious issue facing the district? And 21%, 1 in 5, told us it was the lack of funding. After that, 15% talked about large class sizes. We have a number of things coming in at less than 10. The diversity issue is mentioned. High taxes at 6 is well below what we're finding in other suburbs in the west and in the south. That's normally running at anywhere from 15 to 20%. Declining quality was mentioned, poor past spending. Lack of discipline is down as a concern here. And as you can see, 11% were unsure. Those were the folks that really didn't have any recent ties to the school district. Now, what's noteworthy about this chart is the last category. Those are the folks that said there is nothing they consider to be a serious issue facing the school district. And these are the ones, as they have in the past, really chided us for having the temerity to bring up the fact that there would be an imperfection in this sea of tranquility. 26%, though, of nothing is 4 times, roughly 4.5 times higher than the norm across the metropolitan area. Those are your core boosters. Those are the folks that are with you through thick and through thin, and 26% is an unusually high number for that core constituency. We then turn to technology, and this district certainly is technology-minded. Almost 50% thought that technology was absolutely essential. If we add to that another 44% who feel that it's very important, we're over 90% then indicating that it is at least a very important aspect of education today. We did have 10% though, 7% saying somewhat important, and 3% who we kiddingly call the Luddites, who don't consider that technology is at all important in today's schools. But as you can see, technology is something that people care about in this district in education. Now, if we're going to ask about the importance, we should also get a rating of how good they feel the technology opportunities in the schools are. And 87% rate the technology opportunities as either excellent or good. Only 5% were more critical, and 8% were unsure. Now, we're going to have uncertainty, again, because of people who aren't connected to the school district. But the 87-5 ratio of positive to negative is at the top of the metropolitan area in terms of the ratio of positive to negative. People really do think that there are very, very solid technological opportunities offered in the public schools. We then asked how closely people have been following the school board and administration in terms of their policies. And what we found is that Life for You is in a fishbowl. 48% indicated they either very closely or somewhat closely follow what's going on. At the other end, 52% indicated not too closely or not at all. The 48% is somewhat higher than the norm across the metro area. Across the metro area, that norm is approximately 35% now. So you have more interest than we would have expected. In addition, given your demographics, the demographics of a maturing school district would indicate a much lower close followership of the board and administration. 48% is unusually high among other mature districts. How do people feel about governance? How do people feel about the way things are going in the schools? Well, we asked about the school board first, and this one got batted right out of the park. It's the highest we have on the school board through our many, many years of surveying. I think we started surveying here when dinosaurs still flew. But 78% indicated it's either excellent, they're either excellent or good, 14% negative. The norm on this across Metro currently is 55% to 25%. So your negative is about a half of what we would have expected. Your positive rating is well over the norm, 23% over the norm. But what about the district administration? Not surprisingly, the two are very closely tied. We find this in a lot of suburban districts. 78% rate the superintendent and administration as either excellent or good, 15% only fair or poor. For superintendents and the administration, we have to look at this a little bit differently. Here, we take much more notice of the ratio because the percent of people who are unsure about the superintendent and administration tends to vary from district to district. Here you have very, very few people, relatively speaking, who couldn't evaluate the administration. But the 5-to-1 ratio of favorable to unfavorable, tied with the 78% positive, places the district within the top 10% in the metropolitan area, and clearly within the top 20 districts totally across Minnesota. Finally, the teachers and instructional staff. The teachers and instructional staff have always been well regarded in this district, and you can see that coming through again. In fact, you broke the glass barrier at the top. Very, very few districts make it to 90. This is one of them, where teachers and instructional staff are viewed as either excellent or good. 5% and only 5% indicated negative ratings. Marginal comments tended to indicate those were for idiosyncratic reasons. A fourth grade teacher they didn't like 30 years ago. Those kinds of things, or that the desks were uncomfortable. And then finally, 5% are uncertain. That 16-to-1 favorable to unfavorable is the highest we have anywhere across Metro. So in general then, looking at job performances, we see no red flags going up. In fact, what we see on the other hand is a district that is pretty much in tune with the jobs that the board, the administration, and especially the teachers and instructional staff are doing. Now let's turn to another topic that always comes into play when we're looking at referenda, and that is comparative property tax evaluations. Since how you feel about your taxes has a major impact about how you're going to vote on a tax issue. What we found, we asked this two ways. First, total property taxes, and then second, school only. In terms of the total property taxes here, 38% felt that they were comparatively high. We have 53% who thought they were comparatively about average, and we had 2% who said they were somewhat low. If we take a look at this and cast it against other school districts, the 38% is relatively low for the high side. In fact, we expect to see this at the 50% level. The 53% about average is running 12% higher than the norm. What you have then in terms of the total property tax climate in this district is something we term benign. It's not as if people are going to go yippee skippy, let's raise taxes, but it is something where people are fairly satisfied with taxes versus the value of what they're getting. Now, what about the schools? Well, 34%, even lower, indicate it's on the high side, with 54% feeling about average. Again, a very benign tax climate. 2% again indicated it was somewhat low, and a little bit higher, only 3% higher, of uncertainty, with people not knowing what portion of their property tax goes where. What do we consider to be a non-benign climate? Well, we have a couple of districts this year who are in the middle of very hostile tax climates. They're showing 70% in the very high and somewhat high column. Quite a difference with the 34% that you're showing right now. Do people feel that the school district is adequately funded? We have a split. 47% say no, 45% say yes. We're finding this split more and more often across the metropolitan area. It stems from one thing. No one has quite figured out what the state legislature did. They're not sure if it's new money, they're not sure if it's old money, they're not sure if it's their money. And so as a result, people are really puzzled on this one. The 47 to 45 split mirrors just about every other metropolitan area school district on that. It's interesting to note, however, that those that said yes, you are adequately funded, didn't have an impact at all in terms of how they were voting on the referendum. What about financial management? Well, you have one of the highest, and have continued to have one of the highest evaluations of your financial management across Metro. 67% said it was excellent or good. The average on this, again, is 45 to 50. 25% indicated it was only fair or poor. We expect to see the negative at about 40%. So your negative is way down, the positive is very high. In fact, it is among the top 3 that we have across the state right now. So the financial management then is not really an issue. 25% are concerned about it, but 25%, as we're going to see, pretty much approximates the folks that are supporting no new taxes, that credo. How about referendum predisposition? When people hear that you're going to have a tax increase, not telling them how much, not telling them what for, they split into groups. 17% told us they would be against almost anything that you proposed. 16% told us that you would be for they would be for just about anything you proposed. And 2/3, 66%, told us it would depend. They'd vote for some things, but they'd vote against other things. The quick difference is the core opposition subtracted from the core support. In this case, 16% minus 17%, which means you start the referendum 1 point back. Now, what does this mean? Well, we've been following this statistic for over 20 years. And even today, it's possible, with a hard effort, to pass a referendum if the difference goes as high as minus 16, minus 17. We've actually had a few districts we've worked with where it passed at minus 25 and one at minus 31. The minus 1, though, is an exceptionally clean figure to be starting at. Basically, you're starting at even. So the key then is the persuadables, persuading them and motivating them to get out to vote. Now, how did people feel then about the $6 million capital projects levy? Now, please keep in mind that we told them this was a renewal and that there would be no property tax increase. 79% indicated they would support, 19% indicated they would oppose. If we take a look at the intensity, strong supporters outnumber strong opponents by better than 5 to 1. Again, this is a very, very good picture to take a look at. But also keep in mind this is an off-year election, so turnout is going to be pretty critical. But nevertheless, in looking back at referenda elections where we've done surveys for you, we've never had quite this high an initial start. Why are people supporting it, we might ask? Well, first and foremost, education is important. 17% also see a need, and 17% said, oh, there's no tax increase. Of course I'll support that. 5% indicated that security was important to them. 4% are parents with children in the schools, and 2% said technology was important. Now, these are reasons that people gave us. We didn't give them an array to choose from, so it is top of the mind. Well, what are the opponents saying? Well, they're concerned about poor past spending. They're also saying that they don't have any children in the school, so why should they pay? 3% said if we fail this one, we could get a tax cut. And 3% simply said that taxes are too high. That 3% tax is too high goes back to the benign tax climate that you currently have, because that usually runs as the second reason, if not the first reason, why there's opposition. And 1% gave us reasons that were absolutely incredible. They were scattered. They don't like IBM. They don't like Apple. They haven't liked things since games came on board. So in general then, what are we facing? You've got your opponents supporting you because first, education's important, and they rate the quality of education here very, very highly. In addition, they see a need, and they like the fact there's no new tax increase this time around. On the other side, you've got history, 6%. 2% of them were talking about things that happened in the 80s. Very, very long memories here. And 5% have no children in schools. They're not going to vote for it because they just aren't a constituent. Now, we then examined a number of arguments that people were giving in favor, or that people could give in favor of the referendum. And what I've done in this is highlight what the argument is, but I'll be happy to expand that as we go through. So the first argument, in which 52% said they would be much more likely to support, said people who say a Newtown incident can't happen here are wrong. All school districts should take steps to minimize the chances of an armed intrusion. So a majority said with that argument, they're much more likely to support. 49%, just behind, indicated they were much more likely when they were told we live in turbulent times requiring our public schools to invest in safety and security measures. We have two at 47%. The one is we can't expect student performance to significantly improve without additional support for education. And the other is the financial challenges facing our schools will continue to grow. We need to help prepare for the future by supporting our schools today. 44% thought that the cutting edge like neighbors argument was important. And that one read to fully offer cutting edge technology opportunities like neighboring school districts, technology spending must be supported. And then finally, at 42%, but nevertheless, over 4 in 10 people saying that the argument makes them much more likely to support the referendum, is the Bloomington School Board and administration have done a good job of keeping expenditures down during rough budget times. Now we need to support our public schools. So in general then, every one of those arguments is credible. We consider an argument to be credible when it reaches the 40% level of those who are saying they're much more likely to support when they hear it. Now, if we're going to ask arguments in favor, we should also ask arguments that might be used in opposition. So, we start with an old chestnut, at least I like to call it that. Local property taxes are going up too quickly. Homeowners just can't afford taxes for education. We took that directly from the Minnesota Taxpayers Association website. 19% indicated they would be much less likely to support, given that argument. It was interesting for us to note that they were already opponents. So the gain on that one is very, very little indeed. The other one is funding for local schools is adequate. They need to do a better job spending the money. 14%, those are also arguments, if you think about it, that they're very, very hard to answer. Again, 14% indicated they'd be much less likely. It actually shifted 0.5% of the folks who were supporting into opposition. 12% thought that public schools are doing too much beyond providing a good basic education. The only way to stop this trend is to say no. 12%, again, very, very small impact. In fact, all of these are small impacts. We consider an opposition argument, incidentally, to be at least somewhat effective if it hits 30% on the much less likely side. So doing too much, that one really did not have that much traction. 10%, the state legislature provided adequate funding this year, so local taxpayers did not need to support schools. Again, very, very low, and it changed nobody's mind. 10%, this is our Luddite argument, being able to use technology effectively and efficiently is given too much emphasis in today's schools. 10% bought into that argument. Again, it changed the mind of 1%. Our schools are secure enough. No measure is foolproof to stop an attack or intruder is foolproof, to stop an attack or intruder into a school. Only 9% thought that was a telling argument and indicated they would be much less likely to support. It changed nobody's mind. And then finally, the district is focusing on fiscal structural changes. The problem requires other programs for at-risk students. This one was not bought either. In fact, 9% on the basis of this indicated they would be much less likely to support. Not only did it not move people out of the favorable category, it did not even move people out of the persuadable category. It did not move those folks that told us they were unsure. That one and schools being secure enough are two that are really dead ends and could in fact prove to be counterproductive if those arguments are used during the campaign by the opposition. What's the preferred information source on this referendum? As it has been in the past, mail brochures and newsletters, 53%, indicate that that's how they want to receive information. 23% talked about the local newspaper. We have the electronics coming in, 7% for the school district website and 6% for the email. Telephone call was mentioned by 2. Those are folks that don't have long attention spans and they'd like it in the duration of a call. 1% indicated the grapevine. That's amazing. We never have the grapevine coming in that low. So something is going on. And 2% indicated the most idiosyncratic things you've ever heard. Billboards and text messages as being what they would like, how they would like to be informed. But in general, as you can see, there's 2 primary sources of information that people are going to use. The newsletter and mail brochures from the district and the local newspaper. Household financial stress in this district is moving down. Now, by a stressed household, we mean a household that told us A, their expenditures were exceeding their income, or B, they were meeting their expenditures but were able to save little or no additional funds. That's 37%, and that has dropped down significantly during this past year. 61% told us that either they were managing well and able to save, or they're managing very comfortably, and 2% were unsure. So in general, the financial stress factor in this district is somewhat lower than what we're finding in other districts across Metro currently. Then finally, we thought it might be interesting to take a look at where support, where opposition, where persuasion needed to occur across the city. And what I've done is I've taken the demographics and taken a look at support or opposition in each of these demographic territories. So, for example, under 5 years refers to residential longevity. As you can see, no group opposes by more than 30, and no group supports by less than 71. In fact, we go up to 80 among those newbies and among what we affectionately call the settlers, those that have been here 21 to 30 years. If there's a Bloomington school child at home, almost 90% are supporting. If it's an empty nest, 76% are supporting, and that's unusually high. Republicans are splitting in half, 50% for, 50% opposed. Democrats, it's 88 to 10, and among independents, almost as strong, 83 to 17. So we have then a majority right across the political spectrum, a little bit less of a majority among Republicans. We have a gender gap. 82% of women are supporting, while only 72% of men are supporting. If that disappears or if it goes the other way, that becomes a red flag for us. Because on education issues over the past 20 years, when that gender gap hasn't been in evidence, there's always been an unsuccessful attempt. It just it creates a climate in which it's possible to be very successful in turning the referendum back. If there's a preschooler at home, again, almost 80%. If they look to mail brochures or the newsletter, 73% are supportive. If they're reading the Bloomington paper, 86% are supportive. And if they go to the school district website, 82% are supportive. And again, keep in mind that we're looking at a total support level of 76% and an opposition level of 23%.
This is likely voters.
And this, I'm sorry, I should have said that early on. This is likely voters. These are the folks that we would estimate would go to the poll. The current estimation is 36% could turn out. And that's in line with what we're finding in other districts where it's ranging from 33 to about 40. If we look at other demographics across the city, there's only one ward that really stands out, and even that's providing a majority. That's Ward 4. Wards 1, 2, and 3, though, are coming in at around 80%. Ward 1, in fact, is coming in at almost 90%. If we look at age groups, we don't have the general pattern on this one in which younger voters tend to support while older voters tend to oppose. That's not the case. If we look at
Why does it say Hopkins Public Schools?
Oh, the template, it's Bloomington.
It's Bloomington,
Yeah.
sorry about
Yeah.
that. We use a template on these because we tend to use the same demographic clusters. Did it say that on the first one?
No. No, that's the first one I've seen.
Okay, there shouldn't be any others. At 75 to 80% right across the, or 71 to 80% right across the age groups. What's particularly noteworthy here is the most troublesome group in terms of referenda, which historically has been the 55 to 64-year-olds. They're not anti-schools, they're just anti-tax. They're expecting Social Security, they're a little bit worried about that, and perhaps they're a more recent empty nester, and 77% that said they would support. If it's an alumni, and that is the respondent graduated from Bloomington schools or the spouse did, 82%, and if they have a relative, and this could be a cousin, a nephew, a grandchild, any kind of relative, 82% also supported. And then finally, as we go down the household value for a moment, renters at 71% are one of the low group, but we also know in a special election, unfortunately, that renters don't turn out, but they're still a good 70 to 30. If we take a look at income levels, or rather not income levels, but housing value levels going from 200 to 350, it ranges between 79% and 83%. And then finally, over $350,000 homes, it moves the other way, but it still goes 2 to 1 in favor, 67% to 33%. Again, we've got no group that requires exceptional persuasion in order to bring them back into a majority. The issue is going to be keeping the majority during the campaign. And again, that's going to require a good grassroots effort, which it should be noted earlier in the meeting, you seem to already have going. The key on this is going to be voter turnout, pure and simple. All of the groups are right in position in terms of supportive, and people see the need, and certainly tax cost isn't going to be an issue this time. So as a result, we would say that this has a very good chance of passing. I'm not going to say it's a slam dunk. Nothing is a slam dunk these days. And this one certainly isn't. We also know that as time increases, as we get closer to the election day, negative opinion also increases, that you see a drop in that as more and more people become aware. However, you're starting at 76%, so that's a fairly good margin to overcome the normal, what I call the normal Bloomington tendencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you giving such detailed information. We will receive copies of that so we can look at it in more detail. Question occurs to me right off the bat, I guess, and that is based on the relatively low turnout that we had in primary election here. I'm wondering what your observation would be, Bill, about how that compares with turnout maybe in some of the other municipalities that had primary elections, and given we're looking at a projected 36% turnout in the general, is that still something we might expect, or did that primary signal something else?
No, I don't believe your primary signaled something else. The primary contests just were not, how can I phrase this delicately? They just were not hot enough and combative enough to really generate a high turnout. So as a result, when we're looking at this referendum, I would certainly hope that the turnout isn't generated. In fact, the lower the turnout goes, until it gets down to about 20%, you actually benefit somewhat. But the 36% is in line with what we're seeing in most places. Given it is a tax election, I would expect to see more people turning out. You also have board elections, though, as I understand, at the same time.
Correct.
That could draw additional people. But the primary reason why people will come to the polls in November is going to be the referendum.
Good. Director Hibbs?
So what's the margin of error on this?
Plus or minus 5,
5. And
85 out of 100.
can you talk a little bit about the methodology? And I'm just wondering, over time now, how things have changed, particularly as people are moving away from having landlines to just having cell phones and those kinds of things. How does that affect your ability to get a good picture?
That's a good question. It's been a challenge. 37% of the residents in Bloomington are cell phone only. What that's meant is that, well, how we handle it, let me share a trade secret, is we obtain from the phone company what the blocks are of cell phone numbers. Now, the one problem is that all of those numbers may not be currently used. So we end up then with a lot of numbers that are just not connected. Okay. Second thing we have to do, though, is make sure that we're catching people, and we have to use 952. So we're going to immediately miss folks that got a cell phone in 763, or maybe moved here from Los Angeles and are on that code. Fortunately, that's less than 2% of the electorate out there. Okay, third thing we do, though, is we are able to obtain the information on which of the receiving towers people use. And so as a result, we can factor it down even further then, so that we're not calling someone in Anoka City. And then finally, we actually do ask geography to make sure that they are a resident in Bloomington, and to find out what the address is, and if necessary, go to the reverse directory to make sure that they are a resident. If we, by mistake, find someone who takes the survey and isn't a resident, or thought they were a resident and took it anyway, or thought it would be good fun, that isn't counted in the 400 sample. So you don't have any mismatches, is what we call them.
Okay. And then the question that you asked, where you mentioned that there was a no tax increase, did you also mention that it was going to extend the duration of that technology levy? So you told them,
Certainly did.
told them that as well? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Director Bergstrom?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming, Rick, Bill, Pete. A lot of information, a lot to digest, so I'll try and summarize. What, if any, surprises did you find out of all this data? And if you didn't find any, it's okay to say you didn't find any.
No, there were 2 surprises. The one surprise was the evaporation, if you will, of the hardcore anti-tax percentage. Moving down out of the 30s, which is what we're still finding in some of your neighbors, now down to the 20s and even into the teens here. That was a surprise, but we're also finding that there's a gentler tax climate out there this year than we've seen in about 6 to 8 years. The second thing that I thought was a surprise in the district is that so many of the issues that are being raised are what we call pre-issues. People basically are concerned about two things: lack of funding and also large class sizes. But even there, the concern about it has moderated somewhat. We've had surveys here in the past where lack of funding has stood at 30, 35%. I think even once it hit 40. Large class sizes has usually stood at 25 to 30%. So when people are looking at the district, it's much more upbeat. There's an optimism here that has always been part of Bloomington pride, but now it's actually showing that, yeah, people are pleased with the district and they're willing to show their support for it. So those would be the two things. One is a major shift, I think, across the suburbs in terms of tax climate. And the second thing is the pride now becoming actionable.
Great, thank you very much.
Director Ablin?
What's the significance of the number 400? Why did you choose 400 over 600 over 1,000?
When you take a look at, as the sample size goes up, so does the degree of accuracy. To get 1% more of accuracy, that is to take it down to 4%, we would have had to have called 225 more people. So as your degree of accuracy becomes sharpened, your number that you need to sample really goes up quite rapidly. To get a 3% accuracy, we'd have to talk to 1,110 people across Bloomington. So what we take a look at is that accuracy curve versus the cost curve. And we saw the point where the two intersected, and basically that's why we've always recommended 400. We do it for another reason, though, and that is because it will allow you then to break into subsamples or demographic groups of 4 or 5. That is keeping those subsamples in general above 80. You want to keep the subsamples up as high as possible when you start doing that demographic work that we did at the end. It wouldn't be helpful to us to tell you that 90% are saying they're yes when we've only talked to 10 of them. So it's a function not only of cost versus sample size, the most efficient point, but also the number of subgroups that are needed.
Have you gone through to correlate, if that's the word, of the 400, how many are voters and how many are not voters? I mean, do you have that figure? I mean, do you know, is it 50-50 or what is it?
In terms of the 2000, well, the last election, of course, was a presidential election.
All right.
What we found to be the case in looking, and we don't draw off registered voter lists for one main reason, because 10% tend to be newly registering on election day, even in a referendum election. So we would be missing then those folks that are election day registering. But in looking at this, we found that 86% were registered voters and had participated in the 2012 election.
How many participated 4 years ago in local elections, do you know?
No, we don't take a look at that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mark?
This may actually be a question for Director Bergstrom and perhaps Mr. Kaufman. One of my concerns when we were talking about whether we were going to go out for referendum was whether the Bloomington Public School staff was going to be supportive of this. And at this point, my understanding is that some, if not all, of our bargaining units are kind of taking a neutral position on this. Given what you've seen here in terms of the survey, are you confident that we can prevail even if our employees don't play an active role in the referendum campaign?
I would say we can prevail. It's going to make it even more challenging for us, difficult. I think, as Bill pointed out, the most important thing is getting the turnout. I don't know what our teaching staff or how many employees are actually residents of Bloomington. We could look at that number. But Bill and Pete can expound on this, but neutrality is often problematic because, especially for teachers and staff that connect with parents, parents will ask, parents will talk with them. Certainly supportive staff for any referendum is going to be advantageous to us. Those staff that remain neutral, it will be problematic. Our hope is that we continue to provide information and we can continue to make the case just like we are with parents and citizens in the community. And that they look at the factors that we've not only shared through this survey, where our community is with respect to school safety and security, but I think we're hitting on those other areas that they have concerns about. So when you drive into or you focus on what are our messages, it's really our key messages and where we want to be focused, not only from the district, but certainly the Citizens Campaign and their efforts. And I trust and hope that our staff will, those that will vote in Bloomington and those that are asked by parents, that they'll be honest and share with them reasons for why they may not be supporting this or reasons why they may be neutral, but that it's focused on what is in the best interest of kids. Pete and Bill or Dick?
Well, I agree. I'll just make it real short. I think we approach this opportunity with a positive attitude, and so, you know, yes is the answer. I mean, it's a very short answer to your question, but yes, we can be successful, and I think we will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys have a lot of the history of when teachers or other staff are supported or not, so.
Well, first, let me say that I was absolutely shocked that the teachers are not supporting. This is very, very contrary to past practice. And we are working with 15 school districts right now. And in all of the others, the teachers are right there supporting the referendum. There may be very good reasons for it. Perhaps the referendum doesn't include something that people were looking for. More stuff for at-risk students or technology a specific way. But as we saw in the survey, those messages aren't resonating with people. It's not a good opposition message. Is it doable? Can the referendum still be won? Yes. Are the teachers going to be missed? Certainly. From a strategic point of view, it's a decision which I find incomprehensible. But nevertheless, from a strategic point of view, I don't think it necessarily cripples your effort at all.
I think it might be semantics, but I think a more accurate representation might be that the teachers are neutral on this as opposed to not. I mean, not supporting implies opposing, and they clearly haven't taken a position either way, so I think that's a more accurate statement, but I hear your point.
Are there any questions or board discussion? An opportunity to discuss referendum? All right. I think we're satisfied and pleased. In my case, I want to say that's a great report. I'm real proud to be able to see that. I think we had some hints earlier. I've been at other presentations you've done recently and heard the comparison of how Bloomington rates with other districts as you're showing some data as to what else goes on in the Twin Cities area as well as Bloomington, and it's great to see the approval at the level that it is, that we continue to move in the right direction in terms of management of the district, in terms of what's going on in our schools and educating children. So, thank you. Always good to hear from you. Bill.
It couldn't well. I've always considered Bloomington to be a special district. It really is a gem across the metropolitan area. And I'm not only saying that because my wife graduated from the Bloomington School District.
Of course not. Thank you very much again. And thank you to those of you working for passage of the referendum who remain for that. You may leave now if you have other places you'd like to be instead of sitting in the boardroom. But the board has another report with a PowerPoint regarding what goes on in our classrooms and outside of the classroom in terms of student support. So we have a PowerPoint presentation, learning supports on our laptops. We'll see that also for the public. as well as hearing from people. Well, I'll have them introduce themselves. The introduction is response to intervention, learning supports update. So thank you for being here tonight. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chair Culver, members of the board, Superintendent Fujitaki. I'm Eric Melby, the Director of Student Services for Viewing Public, and I wanted to introduce you. I'm happy to introduce you to a couple of new members of the Student Services team. With me tonight, I've got Gina Miller, who is a longtime Bloomington staff member, teacher, longtime special education, actually deaf, hard of hearing teacher who has made some changes in her career, I guess you could say. She still loves special education, of course, but
Thanks for being here.
Gina most recently was a part-time RTI coordinator for the district and special education mentor, and now this year is a full-time RTI coordinator for the district as we continue to move forward with our RTI efforts. And then Kate Pahacek, next to Gina, is new to the district. Kate comes to us from Stillwater School District, where she was doing very similar work in a learning supports coordinator role. She's got a lot of expertise around the concept of learning supports, which we'll be sharing
Great.
with you.
Kate, welcome tonight.
Thank you.
And in an effort to show the teamwork that is going on around learning supports and RTI in the district, we also have Assistant Superintendent Chris Lennox up here with us tonight. And if the table was bigger, we probably could have invited Tom Holton to come up too, because we're all working together on the concept of learning supports and moving RTI forward in the district. So I'm going to turn the show over to Gina and Kate here for the most part to update you on the work they've been doing. And as you mentioned earlier, Chair Culver, this was going to be part of a study session, and it's now part of the board meeting, but in the spirit of a study session, if you have questions that come up during the presentation, we'll be happy to answer them for you. So,
Thank you.
Thanks. First, want to talk about Kate and I being a partnership. We're really lucky in that I've been a part of Bloomington Schools. This is my 13th year, and Kate being new, we bring that new, familiar with the role, and then me really being familiar and knowing Bloomington. So we're really excited to keep working together. Today, the purpose of our presentation is really to share the goals of learning supports and to highlight how learning supports addresses those barriers to success along the pathways, and provide context for the relationship between RTI and learning supports, as well as a brief overview of what learning supports is.
So the goals of learning supports, the page probably could go on, but we tried to sort of condense it here. Improved achievement for all students, and it really is all students across the spectrum of learners. Improved stakeholder involvement and satisfaction is one of the goals of this work. Improving organization and instructional effectiveness is probably the first one I actually think of, and improve financial performance. So this is Pathways to Graduation, which you've probably seen before and is on the wall over here. Pathways to Graduation really is about where do we want students to be and how are they going to get there. Learning supports, the role it plays in the pathways is addressing the barriers students have along their pathway. How are we going to address them systematically?
So when we look back, I have been lucky enough to have been a part of the evolution of RTI since its beginning as a practitioner at Normandale Hills and then even into last year. So part of this is my history too within Bloomington. But I put some few bullet points up there to kind of refresh your memory. In 2007, 2008, we started with elementary pilot sites. We identified a couple sites, of which I worked at one. That's when I got to move from being a deaf, hard of hearing teacher to also being part of this work and a reading specialist. The next year, we added ABSIS-funded teachers, PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. The next year, we really delved deeper and added more sites with our Minnesota Reading Corps volunteers. 2010 to 2012, those 2 school years, it looks so little, where it says additional sites and deeper implementation. This is where a lot of the work was done by teams at the district level and building level. Last year, as a part-time RTI specialist, I did an audit, kind of in a where are we at the district level as well as each individual site, kind of see where are we at, how can we better support this implementation. So this summer, as we added Kate's position and we kind of talked about how does this all fit together, we came up with this graphic, and excuse us, this is hand-drawn. This is our work. We are RTI and learning support specialists. We are not graphic people. The first one is really the first, on the bottom left, is where we started for RTI. It's tiered academic interventions. Really, we looked at reading, and we had good core instruction for all, a little bit of intervention for some, and then even more intensive intervention for a few. And as we got going, we realized we needed to really look at behavior as well. So it became that second figure where we talked about an academic and behavior interventions. Again, for all, for some, and then for few, we had more. So when we put that into the context of learning supports, it becomes a broader pyramid. You can see the RTI components in the middle, and then there's this extra part on the side. That is part of the classroom-based approaches for learning. When I think about that, I think about those other things as a teacher I know are getting in the way of my students' learning, that come to me every day in the classroom, students who aren't engaged, students who come with just a multitude of barriers, and what can we do about that? So we put that pyramid into the context of the 6 arenas of learning supports, and you can kind of see how RTI becomes a component within a greater scope of learning supports.
So to look a little bit at the broader scope there, classroom-based approaches is something that, as Gina alluded to, we've had work going and systematized within that area for a long time. However, students come with issues outside of things that you can address through a math intervention or a reading intervention. So there are a lot of issues out there. This is a framework to sort of compartmentalize, categorize, and then address them systematically. So some of the others, I'm not sure how well you can see on yours, but classroom-based approaches is at the bottom. Support for transitions is the next area on there. Think of transitions, you can think of them very broadly. The big transitions kids go through, one of the big ones is 5th into 6th grade, or pre-K into kindergarten, or after graduation. Those are some big transitions, but kids go through a lot of smaller transitions every day too. Transitioning from the bus to the school door, those kinds of things. The next area on there is family engagement and learning. So some of these might sound familiar to you. It's not that we have not done anything within these areas. This is about systematizing the work though. So that's the next arena. The one at the top is community supports. Our community is not only available to us, but is even now coming in and helping us in the classroom and in our schools. How can we further systematize and sort of grow that within our system? Crisis assistance and prevention is the 5th area there. And student and family interventions are those more individualized student by student, family by family interventions that we put into place.
So really, when we think about it, learning supports is a framework of systems and structures that aligns resources and support to respond to student need, to ensure success along the pathways.
Our work really is about that framework. It's about building, maintaining, monitoring, and adjusting the framework to best address students' barriers to learning, barriers to engagement, and barriers to teaching. What are some of those things that get in the way of teachers doing all they could do in the classroom? And we really accomplish this by doing 4 things. And this is where this sounds so simple, but there's a lot that goes into this. Building on what's going well, number 1. It's not about throwing out everything we're doing and bringing new things in. Let's really build on what's going well. Enhancing capacity for promoting promising practices. We have a lot of great ideas that we might not have even discovered within our district already and within our community. Escaping old ideas that are limiting student success is a big part of this. So sort of that strategic abandonment of some things that maybe aren't moving us forward, things that we've always done, but maybe aren't things that are moving us forward academically for our students. And establishing new approaches that are effective, sustained, and replicated. If we've got a great gem of genius in one place, how do we put a system in place so that we can capitalize on that for all students?
So really, when you think of learning supports, it's about moving away from reacting to problems toward system development and a strong emphasis on prevention and early identification, early intervention.
So the work that we're doing right now, and this, by the way, is all of this is based on the work of Howard Edelman and Linda Taylor out of UCLA. This is work they've been working on for 30 years. And as Linda Taylor put it, we want to revolutionize education, to really move things forward. And if you believe in the mission statement, developing all of our learners, there are things that stand in the way of that happening. How do we systematically address some of those things? So one of the first steps in this is mapping. It's called mapping at the schools, where and it's sort of that step one. What are we already doing maybe that's working well? It's about going to each site, and we've already done this at the district level. Actually, last spring, this was done. Let's, within that learning supports framework, within those 6 areas and those 3 tiers, what are we already doing? Let's take a look, sort of a state of the union. Where are we at? Where are we maybe hyper-developed, and where are we maybe underdeveloped? Then we're going to look for redundancies and gaps and start to set some priorities for continuous improvement going forward.
So really, we could have talked for hours. But if you have any questions, we'd love to answer that. We'd love to come back and keep you updated on our work as we move along as well.
Mr. Director Hibbs.
So, if I can take you back to your diagram.
Yep.
You sort of talked about it, I think, in somewhat theoretical terms, but can you give me some tangible examples of those compartments? What's meant by that compartment?
Just go ahead.
Sure. I think we probably could pick any one of them. The one that I think that we have just such huge potential, and anytime you talk about a new initiative coming in, what's that going to cost us? There's some really big gains to be made just by thinking differently about how we do things, not about spending more money or bringing more people in. One of those areas is support for transitions. I think about that one a lot. We already have some things, I'm sure, in place when we are moving students for some of those big transitions from our elementary schools to our secondary schools. But let's think about new students. Number one, some of our students that are most needy are the ones that transition the most throughout our school day. They transition out to see a social worker. They transition out and back in to see an interventionist. Let's look at number one, putting together a work group to talk about how could we reduce some of those transitions. Maybe instead, and this goes also to being more preventative and proactive, maybe instead the social worker perhaps is moving into the classroom to help teach the classroom teacher, give them some new skills to deal with students who are having issues rather than transferring them out. Let's talk about family engagement and learning. How are we using our cultural liaisons? How are we best using them to support our families who are coming in to register their students would be an example. How are we, in fact, Gina and I witnessed just about a week ago, a new family coming in to register their student. And some of the barriers, not only in terms of language, but culturally, when they say, give us 4 forms of identification, do they know what that means? So trying to smooth that for families. They're literally, I should have actually brought the map that we did at the district level, pages and pages and pages of examples of things that are falling into those areas and those tiers.
So typically when people are doing a gap analysis, they're comparing against some kind of a standard or something like that. So what are you doing in particular to identify gaps in each of those compartments?
Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
When we think of the barriers students have, we'll look at what do we have in place to meet those barriers. So we'll work with teams to talk about what are those barriers to learning that they're experiencing at their school. Because they'll look different at each school, what those barriers could be based on who comes to their school. And then from there, decide, do we have interventions or systems in place to meet those needs? And if we don't, there's one of our gaps.
So if I could add one thing here, one of the really beautiful things about this work is that it capitalizes on all of the people we have in our district already with really great, it isn't Gina and I sitting in a think tank and thinking of a barrier and how do we address that. It's about setting up a new meeting structure, new committee structure that really is focused on continuous improvement for the schools and for the district. So we're putting together work groups of people that make sense to come in and address some of these barriers. And then when the work is done, it gets implemented, and that group maybe isn't a group that keeps meeting forever and ever and ever around something. They're there to actually accomplish a task and then sort of dissolve. So we're trying to capitalize on all the resources we have, both within the district and in the community.
Particularly though, as our demographics change, wouldn't you expect that the kinds of barriers, I mean, that you can't necessarily disband that group because you're gonna probably see different barriers coming up that need to be addressed.
Right, and what we'll do is we'll use the work of the buildings to determine, can we disband a group, can we not, has it met that? Or is there a different priority coming up? If we've addressed it and we've systematized a way to meet that barrier, then we might move on to a different barrier. But knowing that if that isn't functioning or working, we can come back to it.
And then I guess my last question is just, so I think, you know, from what I hear at school board conferences and so forth, RTI has kind of become, I mean, everybody's doing it. Everybody's come to recognize that that's the way you need to address some of these issues. Is the concept of learning supports also becoming widely implemented, or is that more cutting edge?
It really is more cutting edge. The acknowledgement that students have a wide array of barriers, especially you mentioned the changing demographic. A lot of districts are experiencing that. And not only with that, students just come with barriers anyway. Systematically addressing the barriers outside of the academic arena is not something a lot of districts have taken on or necessarily had a framework to do. So it's not something you see everywhere. I personally believe it will be eventually, but we're kind of on the front edge of this.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Director Bergstrom.
I don't want to get ahead of myself and forget my manners. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Kate, welcome to the district.
Thank you. Thank you.
I like that neat little wristband you have on there. I'm curious to know how our teachers feel about all of this. You know, they're in the classrooms and they're interacting with you and your team, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And what is their response to all this?
This is fairly new. I mean, I've been here a little over a month, and so we haven't had a lot of interaction with teachers yet. We're going to be in every building talking about this with teachers, but I can speak a little bit because I've started implementation of this in another district, and I was a curriculum coordinator prior to that, so I've always been in curriculum, and there's something about being in curriculum that people see you coming in kind of cringe a little. What new thing are we going to have to do? What new state standards are coming around? This was one of those things that made people, after they listened for a couple minutes, go, this makes some sense. So you're telling me that all these issues that I have there anyway with students in terms of barriers, we're going to start to systematically look at. Sort of feels like there's a coach for the team. It's not kind of every man for themselves. So it is something that teachers, and not just teachers, but all the other support staff we have in our buildings, our nurses, our psychologists, our social workers, our counselors, our interventionists, people that have sort of felt like their efforts were a bit marginalized and fragmented on the outside are now incorporated into what's happening. So I'll be honest with you, it's one of those things that hasn't been a really hard sell for people because it makes sense. It makes sense to people.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Corman.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so when we talk about RTI, we talk about tiers, right?
Mhm.
Did I say right?
Mhm.
Yes, you do.
Okay. So do we have 6? I think that's what it is. Is it a total of 6 tiers?
We
Am I
have
right?
Areas.
6 areas
And
for
there's 3 tiers within each area.
within each one. So specifically speaking about our ESL students, can you give us more information about how those apply to the ESL students and how many tiers they go through?
I'll give you maybe a more concrete example. So the 6 areas are sort of the 6 categories for for all of these interventions and things that we have in place. So given let's talk about the ESL population. Family engagement and learning is one of those areas. So for all, within the first tier is what we do for all of our students. We might have documents translated into different languages. That might be something that we just provide in general. For everybody, it's there for them to see. The tier 2 is, what if that didn't work? What if the family didn't get the information, even though we translated it for families? Maybe online access isn't the best way to reach that family. So then what's the next intervention that we put in place? The tiers really are, when that didn't work, what comes in next? That's what the tiers are about. So maybe at that point, at some point, maybe it's some kind of phone call system to families, because I'm just coming up with an example here. So the online translated document didn't work. Maybe then we go to the next tier of intervention for the families it didn't work for, and maybe it's a phone call system. At that point, what if that didn't work? What if we weren't able to reach the family? Then we'd move into something more intensive and individualized for those families. So our hope is to get as many of as we can in the first tier. But then when that doesn't work, what's the next system that comes into place to help reach all of our families? And again, it goes right back to the mission statement. If we're gonna reach all of our learners, we need to have more than one trick in our hat. If there's one thing doesn't work, what do we go to next?
So do we provide services, with all tiers, all categories for ESL students?
Absolutely.
Not just the first one?
Absolutely.
students.
And if it's within every one of those categories, yes.
So they go from
Yes.
first category to the third one to all
Absolutely.
tiers?
Absolutely.
A family might come, and our students might come and have barriers to learning in 2 of the 6 categories. They may have barriers to learning in all 6. They may only have a barrier to learning in 1 category. So whatever that barrier is, that's what we will then address. So you never know with what students will come to school with.
So since you're talking about how important it is, family engagement here in tier 1, does this mean then that maybe we're finding additional ways to make communication with the families stronger? Like we're actually making sure this new year that they do get that information that it's needed for them to have?
Absolutely. So that, go ahead.
Well, I can even offer, Nellie, that would be part of the mapping. So as we look at what we have, that will be evaluated. So here's what we have, it's working well. Or in each building's trying to do something a little different. Perhaps we can systematize and structure that so that it's all students, all families, regardless of school, regardless of grade level, regardless of building, they could have that same access to information. So what we'll find as we do the mapping is figuring out what we have and maybe what needs to be changed, adjusted, systematized, or where those gaps, perhaps we have it in one school but not in another, and we should, so we'd move that around to where it's needed to address those needs with each of the families.
Because, I know we always provide, I know that, we always provide the information to everybody, but in my own experience as an interpreter, I find out that, yes, the family receives the information, but how much of that information can they actually understand? Or is it really meaningful to them, or is it another paper that, yes, I probably will be able to read it, but, I don't really understand what they mean by this. And so, yeah, the information gets there, but it doesn't, doesn't stay. So I think that's important, it's what you're doing is what I understand.
If I could just jump in real quick, listening to these guys answer questions and even during the presentation, if there's one word that maybe keeps popping out and you keep hearing is systematize things, right? And so we want to be able to help the families that go to Valley View that need that extra assistance, and then there's less students who might need that same assistance at Ridgeview, let's say. But we should have a system in place to address that everywhere. And that goes to what we're doing with RTI. We've got a lot of great things going on in the district, obviously, like these guys talked about. And now we need to have a system that works across the district, and that's what this aims to do.
And I believe it's important, you know, like you mentioned before, including cultural liaisons and the importance of the job that they have that goes beyond, sitting with the kids at the cafeteria during that time, but also really getting involved in this process. Now, does that mean then that our cultural liaisons and our paraprofessionals get the same kind of training or approach to that, to the?
That's a great question. I don't think we're there yet. Where we're at is the beginning stages where we're going to identify what are those barriers and what are the things that are working and not working. And if it's not working, we'll work on that. We'll figure out what is the issue and how do we make it better. We're
Okay.
really looking at working across all areas, all departments, and really looking together, what are we going to do? It's about breaking down all of those different things. That's why, you know, Eric and Chris, and then even Tom could sit here. We're really looking at what do we do as an entire district and then the community as well. So that will come out if it's not working or there a need, that'll come out as we map with every school.
And that the work is never really done. It's that monitor and adjust stage where you have, your student need changes. And I will say, you can, there aren't problems that exist at one school that completely do not exist at another school, but there's differences in proportions of the number of people dealing with those barriers. So that's why the systematizing is so important. What if you're a family struggling? We talked about 37% of our households are stressed financially. There are some barriers that come along with that for the students in our classrooms because of those things. So a quick quote from the Carnegie Task Force on Education, because it's one of the quotes that guide this work. School systems aren't responsible for meeting every need of students, but when the need affects learning, the schools must rise to the challenge. So there are things out there, this work, you wouldn't call it done really at any point. How do we keep improving? How do we keep addressing those barriers?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Unless there are other pressing questions here, we maybe move on, and thank you for the time you spent here already with us. We all come back anytime, bring us up to date on what you're learning, so that we can learn more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kate, Gina, glad you're here. These other people I see a lot. You too. Thanks for coming. The last item on our Part B agenda refers to a board chair report. I can make that pretty simple. Just to report to you that on the 22nd of July, prior to another board meeting, we held a closed meeting for the purpose of evaluation of the superintendent. And based on that conversation and survey that was done among members, we're in the process of finalizing report for the year then for 2012-2013. And I will share a summary of that at our next meeting, with the expectation that we will have a meeting before our next board meeting, and that would be on the 26th of August. So resolution is in order to schedule a meeting of the board's Personnel Committee for 6 o'clock on the 26th for the purpose of having a report on negotiations and also of engaging on the superintendent's evaluation.
Mr. Chair,
Director Hibbs.
so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Just to be
Yes,
sure,
please.
this is a closed meeting?
Can I ask, is that just for the personnel committee, or was that for the school board to have a closed meeting?
This would be, the Personnel Committee is a meeting of the whole of the school board. We're at that point with what we're doing. So my intention was to ask that it be a meeting of the board and discussing personnel matters. It will be a closed meeting. So is that the intention of the mover of the motion?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Thanks for understanding it my way, Mark. Thanks for asking the question. So is there any discussion which needs to be limited to only the time and place of that resolution? Otherwise, move to the vote. All those in favor, next Monday, 6 o'clock, meeting of the whole for personnel closed meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries? We are at the conclusion of our business, except for our board committee reports and superintendent report. Is there any board member that was engaged enough during our summer break here, we've had a month between meetings, who would like to make a report to us? Yes, Director Bergstrom, please.
I would like to just Do a couple of quick ones. Managed to attend a great performance of Singing in the Rain. It was over at Kennedy High School. Great, absolutely great performance. A lot of fun. Kids did a wonderful time, wonderful job. I think there were 75 students between middle school and high school, behind the stage, staff, that type of thing. Also was over at Family Fun Night at Pond Center the other night. I want to say thanks to the little girl that helped me make my little dinosaur. It wouldn't have been as fun without her. It's kind of nice to see the Parent Advisory Council folks over there. They put on a good show. And then the staff over there. It's always nice to touch base with some old friends. So that's what I have.
Director Bush.
Mine's not a board committee report, but I wanted to do it in person to thank each of you for the beautiful flowers you sent to me. They were the first ones I received, and just so special. And so glad to be back here, and lots of work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're glad you're back. Any other board committee reports at this time? Then I would just briefly summarize my participation with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. There was a full board meeting earlier this month. I'll continue to be a representative to that board. Did any of you receive a email that had an attachment to a survey from AMSD? Did everyone receive a survey from AMSD? All right, I need to check into the communication with that group. It's been my understanding that all of our board members should be receiving that correspondence, and it may not be the case. That survey was related to what we saw as being significant issues in the coming legislative session so that we can initiate the platform process for the coming year. So that's the summary of my report. Anything further? Then we'll move to the superintendent's report.
Thank you. The next school board session will be a school board meeting on August 26th. There will be no study session on that date. The items that were previously scheduled for the study session have been included in the board meeting agenda. The other thing is just for everyone, the back to school, the all staff back to school celebration will be on Monday, August 26th, and that's to kick off the new school year. All staff is invited, and the board members are also invited to that event. All students, except for kindergartners, will start on Tuesday, September 3rd, and kindergartners' first day will be on September 4th. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent Fujitaki. Is there any other board business? If I hear no new business, we're at the conclusion of our agenda. Meeting is adjourned.
Tim, about what date were we supposed to get that AMSD survey?
Middle of last week, I think possibly Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday, I would have received it. Then I had a reminder today. Okay. Sorry, I was given to understand that there would be communication from the AMSD that I'm learning now may not have been the case. During the legislative session also, they were sending updates on some committee business. And
Got some of those.
you get some of those, okay. I'll check and see if everyone was supposed to get that survey and if they're missing some people off of their mailing list. I'll do that tomorrow.
I haven't seen you in a long time. I was waiting.
So it's bound to go bad pretty soon. How's the summer?
Well, busy. Well, you know, when you have little kids, you want to take them to the season. We always spend the day with them. They sit here for over. And be very close to them.